Hello, I'm back and I'm in my bedroom because it got loud in my house and I need a dedicated area. One day it'll come. So I got this book. I'm so excited to read it. And I'm going to do a chapter a day because I have found that that is the best way to get through all the books that pile up on my nightstand that I have struggled in the past with finishing. And what better way to hold myself accountable than to bring my reading to you all? That's actually how I started my YouTube channel, was by reading bedtime stories I figured my boys would only read one day when they, maybe when they didn't have me. And I started reading them a Tuttle Twins book about conspiracy theories that ended up being true. Yes, Constance Bailey, thank you for coming back. I am comforted by your screen name presence in my chat. So, somebody had commented on a Candace live stream and said that she ought to read this. And she said, man, so many people have been telling me to read this. Let me just show this quick. She's like, fine, I'll read it. And today will be longer than the others because I will include the introduction and I think the first page, and that's about 40 pages. So thank you. Nora, good to see you. And I will be, since when I do my other live stream, I'm reading off something on my computer, so I can't see chats. But since this is a book club, comments are welcomed, and I will be reading them as I am reading, so long as I look up every so often. So glad you guys are here. All right, so introduction. I love that. Thank you, Lance. All right, Tavistock in Sussex, England. Quote, is the world's center for mass brainwashing and social engineering activities. From a somewhat crude beginning at Wellington House grew a sophisticated organization that was to shape the destiny of the entire planet, and in the process change the paradigm of modern society. Good morning. Oh, hey. Amazing. I'm so glad. Thank you for spreading our book club. Our first, man, I don't see, and I just got this MacBook. No. Yeah, MacBook. And I don't know how to do all the things that are supposed to be so user-friendly. All right. In this revolutionary work, which undoubtedly will have the effect of a 500 kiloton nuclear explosion, we uncover both the Tavistock network and the methods of brainwashing and psychological warfare being adapted then and now for application to large-scale social engineering projects. This is the Aquarian conspiracy, and that's in quotes, Aquarian conspiracy, as the brainwashers refer to themselves, referring to a super-secret 1974 Stanford Research Institute study entitled Changing Images of Man. You can think of this book as essentially an anti-brainwashing combat manual. Brainwashing depends on the ignorance of its victims. It is all around us. We can all perceive disintegration of our nations in terms of day-to-day personal experiences. However, this is not a coincidence. It is not an accident. What we are witnessing all around us is a planned disintegration of the world economy by the most powerful people in the world. And I think we've been touching on that in my protocols reading. Sorry. What we are witnessing all around us is planned disintegration of the world economy by the most powerful people in the world. This book on the Tavistock Institute attempts to show that the conspiracy is real, who is behind it, what are its final long-term objectives, and how we, the people, can stop them from taking us to hell. I'm putting my finger there so I don't get lost, but I wanted to say there was a guy I saw who was like in the business somehow of psyops, of psychological warfare. And he said that scrolling through short videos it's not only harmful to your health, but it is a tool of brainwashing he is even susceptible to. And he's like, and I know all the tactics, and I am even susceptible, which is interesting. And I find myself up until 3 or 4 in the morning scrolling. I'm like worried about my posture right now because I'm sitting crisscross applesauce on my bed because this is the quietest room. And I do foresee some interruptions, so I hope you'll be patient with me. All right. I had my finger there. I lost it. Beyond utter rage and indignation, the conclusion you, the reader, will reach is that the moral, material, cultural, and intellectual decay that we are witnessing helplessly every day across the globe is not accidental, not an act of God who is punishing us for our earthly misdeeds, but a deliberately induced social crisis. I repeat, this is not a test. This is real, and what's at stake is the future of our planet. Welcome. Make yourselves at home. All the kooks of the world are coming out in the most impressive, which is Sabbat yet. Sabbath? Did I say Sabbat? I meant Sabbath. I mixed up Shabbat Shalom with Sabbath. In the world of smoke and mirrors, there are no flukes, no coincidences, and no accidents. This we prove beyond any reasonable doubt, just as we would have to if we were disputing this case in a court of law. Only the highest standard of excellence and proof will serve our objectives. The stakes are too high and odds against us are too great. What's in the balance is the future of the planet, the immorality of the human race, and the survival of our species. We will prevail. We will succeed no matter what the cost. There are no second chances, third options, or fourth ways. This is it. And with this work that shall stand the test of time, I have drawn the line in the sand. They will not pass. We will not surrender. During World War II, Tavistock was the headquarters of the British Army's Psychological Warfare Bureau, which, through the arrangements of the Special Operations Executive, also dictated policy to the United States Armed Forces in the matters of psychological warfare. Blake Neff comes to mind. Look around you! Exclamation point. As the result of the frontal assaults on our future by the world's leading social scientists and behavioral engineers, the moorings of the national moral purpose collapsed. We, the people, have surrendered to a morally indifferent rationality. Irrationality. Irrationality is where? There it is. Make no mistake. Everything from the New Left to Watergate to Vietnam to Pentagon Papers to the insane hippies, the anti-war movement, and the drug rock counterculture were also pre-planned social engineering projects. I repeat, what's under assault are not only our individual human rights, but rather the very institution of the nation-state republic from the oligarchy's massive social engineering program conducted through Tavistock Institute for Human Relations and other much larger integrated networks of centers of applied social psychology and social engineering that emerged in the aftermath of World War II. These groups regard us and the principles of nation states as their axiomatic philosophical enemy. Like the Goyim, the interlocked juggernaut of evil consists of some of the world's most prestigious centers of knowledge and research, such as Stanford Research Center at Stanford University, Rand Corporation's MIT/Sloan, the Advanced Center of Behavioral Sciences at Palo Alto, the Institute of Social Research at the University of Michigan, the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, the Harvard Business School, the London School of Economics, the National Training Laboratories, the Hudson Institute, Estulin Institute, the National Institute of Mental Health, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the Office of Naval Research. There are others, such as the Geneva-based International Foundation for Development Alternatives and Executive Conference Centers, the first full-time Age of Aquarius graduate school, charged with teaching behavior modification for high-level executives from Fortune's top 500 companies. Human zombies placed at top-level management positions to lead us into the new dark age of transcendental consciousness. 2 FOCI, F-O-C-I. First, the changes needed in the United States, and second, the global order. Over the period of half a century, tens of billions of dollars have been allocated by the government of the United States with surreptitious help from think tanks and foundations aligned with Tavistock to fund the work of these groups. Thank you. I know. I wish that I could avoid the shorts and scrolling. All right. Every aspect of the mental and psychological life of people on the planet was profiled, recorded, and stored into computer systems. Above the closely cooperating groups of social scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, anthropologists, think tanks, and foundations presides the elite of powerful members of the oligarchy. Like the elders, comprised mostly of the old Ventian black nobility. Ventian black. What is that stuff? You know, the blackest black paint? I know there's gentian violet, but then, Vanta black. Venetian. Venetian. I like, though, when I'm reading the protocols, I can highlight a word I don't know and click on it. Can't do that here. Anybody want to look that up? Venetian. Let me see. Yeah. It is like reading current affairs. I know it was written, the protocols was written 100 years ago. When was this written? Copyright 2015. All right. Venetian, there it is. What is the purpose of these behavior modifications, you may ask? It is to bring about forced changes to our way of life without our agreement and without ever realizing what is happening to us. The ultimate goal being the complete extirpation of mankind's inner sense of identity, the tearing out of mankind's innermost soul, and the placement in the vacant space of an artificial synthetic pseudo-soul. However, in order to change mankind's behavior away from the industrial production into spiritualism, and to bring us willfully into the next world of post-industrial era zero growth and zero progress, one must force first a change in mankind's self-image. Ooh, that's an ominous statement. I'm making my screen bigger. There we go. Plaster finish. I thought it wasn't shiny because the idea with the Vanta black is that like they painted a watch Vanta black and they put it behind a black screen and you can see the hands on the clock. But when you you can't see the watch itself until you look at the profile when it's not on that black backdrop. And they painted a car like it. It was fascinating. And I'm wondering if that the old Venetian black nobility is the unseen, maybe. Maybe that's why they named themselves that. Okay. So one must change in fundamental conception of what we are. Thus, the image of man's appropriate to that new era must be sought, synthesized, and then wired into mankind's brain, almost like through our children. As Professor John MacArthur, MacArthur. I love how my brain just fills in words on occasion. John McMurtry wrote in his 2001 opening address at the Science for Peace Forum held at the University of Toronto, quote, "Totality of rule is not the only parameter of totalitarianism. Limitlessness of power also proceeds from an omnipresent center. In the new totalitarian movement, this omnipresent directive force communicates through behavior modification and identity change, the dominant nodes of the interlocked system. Psychological terror is not the essence, but the punctuation mark of the new totalitarianism meaning. The money and consumption command channel is the secret of the movement's success because it avoids responsibility for its failures. The Wall Street prescribed market failures to provide for societies are instead always attributed to transcendental forces of the invisible hand, punishing these societies for alleged sins against market laws. Thus, as catastrophes increasingly befall the majority of the world, the victims are blamed for their new deprivation, misery, and oppression. This is a far more effective mode of rule than jackboot terror, which is more overt, but it exposes the system to another form of resistance. To keep the majority in a continual state of inner anxiety works because people are made too busy securing or competing for their own survival to cooperate in mounting an effective response. This, too, has Tavistock's signature all over it. That feels like cancel culture. You better not say the wrong thing or you'll lose your job. You better let men in women's restrooms. You know, they're like, well, what about the women who want to be men? They're not really predators in men's restrooms. But if you give the creeps out there a pass, anyway, so in the past decade, the entire population of the globe has been kept permanently off balance with one financial meltdown and transnational trade fiat after another, emptying national coffers and overriding rights of domestic self-determination. Populations have been so overwhelmed by the moving juggernaut of economic and environmental crises that a rule of universal insecurity has rendered social majorities paralyzed by low-intensity terror. Better use those paper straws, folks. The necessary condition for any totalitarian movement to continue its advance, because keeping its subjects perpetually off balance, is its modus operandi. Quote, in previous periods of history, we have seen draconian measures put through at the national level, but we have never seen such an assault on people's rights and democratic standards. Each new measure, viewed on its own, may seem an aberration, but a whole host of changes as part on an ongoing continuum constitutes a shift towards total enslavement. They have a number there with a note on, like a citation on who said that, but I'm not going to be reading those. I encourage you to get the book. I may even, since I've been recently monetized, I may put a link, if they allow me, to give you like a discount or something for the books that we read together, because I do want to continue doing this. I've tried to set up book clubs with friends locally, and nobody is into it. And it's weird if I set up a book club and I'll have friends say, yeah, we're in on it. And then they won't talk to me anymore because they don't want to tell me they didn't read. I'm like, oh, dang it. All right. Total power is a supraterrestrial correlative. I have said this word before. It's just jumbled it. Correlative. That's how you say it, right? Sorry. All right. Total power is a supraterrestrial correlative of global power, which can conceive of no limit to itself. There are many challenges for us to overcome. When presented with all the facts, when the evidence is neatly laid out on the table, when the conspirators have been unmasked and defrocked and their deeds shown. Yes.
The TV got turned off, and now we have to redo the passcode.
Maybe get on your laptops for a bit. Okay. And their deeds shown for all the world to see. Still, the ordinary citizen screams conspiracy, refusing to believe such a monstrous, mind-boggling conclusion is real. Until it's too late. Be warned! Exclamation point. We are at the crossroads 10 years ago, and the roads we take now will terminate. Whether we will live in the 21st century as a nation state, republics, or as subjugated, culled, and dehumanized crop of slaves. Dear reader, the situation is extremely grave. We are fighting a combined effort of some of the most brilliant people in history who scheme against us for the purpose of possessing us. But the human will is immortal. Tyrants have killed millions, and yet people fought and eventually won their freedom. Freedom stirs the human heart, and fear stills it. Amidst the deafening cacophony of patriotic silence, insurgent voices command attention. Immorality has its moral basis in truth and incorruptibility. It deserves to be given all the support that it can get. It deserves to be fought and died for. Finally, history teaches by analogy, not identity. The historical experience is not one of staying in the present and looking back. Rather, it's one of going back into the past and returning to the present with a wider and more intense consciousness of the restrictions of our former outlook. Francis Goya's Plate 79, the disaster shows, and this is this, that's what they're talking about. Oop, did I lose it? There it is. Shows the fair maid of liberty, flat on her back, bosom exposed. Ooh, I hope I didn't put naked ladies on YouTube. I did, but you can't see it. So, ghostly figures play out about the corpse while monks dig her grave. Truth has died. Murió la verdad. How is that for an alternative? Forewarned is forearmed. It is not up to God to save us. It is up to us. We will never find the right answers if we can't ask the proper questions. Boy, if that's not how I run my YouTube page. And like, for instance, the wiretap, whether it's Erica or not, Ian Carroll laid out a good explanation as to why it's not. But part of it came out of a novel. And people are like, why haven't you taken it down? It's like, I want a record of this. I want to know what questions I've asked and where those answers led me. And a lot of the things that I've come to be told I'm wrong about, or it's been beat into my head that I'm wrong about it, it turns out I was right. So I'm going to leave it there, and we'll see how this all plays out. Yeah. It's the foot. You did a nice job on what? Yeah. I'll pray with you. Chapter 1, counterinsurgency. Oop. Looky there. I recently heard a quote, and I don't know enough about the man, except, I do know that he used meth and so forth to pass any kind of judgment, but I did hear an AI translation of a speech where he stated that World War III would happen once they found out what was actually going on there. And it's interesting. So, counterinsurgency. Techniques for psychological manipulation of society are about as old as humanity itself. Feudal lords, to preserve and consolidate their power, forever have used punishment and torture as dissuasive agents of change. Even thousands of years ago, it was not the techniques per se, but their conscious application as divide and conquer tools, which aided the ruling class. Oh, on the audio? Interesting. No matter how anti-human a particular technique or therapeutic approach may be, it is not itself counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency cannot proceed merely in horrors. It requires conscious and systematic application by the ruling class, or its dupes. This was achieved by fusing psychology and psychiatry in the 1930s. The first massive application of psychology as a conscious weapon took place in Nazi Germany, especially in reference to eugenics, which played upon the most backward Aryan illusions held by an imposed and on proportions of the masses. While the cause and development of Nazi butchery stemmed wholly from the world economic collapse, its specific form, eugenics, was devised by the Nazis' favorite theoreticians and technicians, or the psychiatrists. Since then, the science of the mind has been converted into the craft of mind destruction. Legitimate therapeutic approaches have given way to behavior-modifying pseudoscience in the name of aversion therapy. This conversation of the mind science was truly shaped by war. The war of mental genocide waged by the bourgeoisie against the working class. The essential premise of the work of Tavistock is the premise that certain kinds of democratic institutions represent far more efficient instrumentalities for fascist dictatorship than the traditional, straightforwardly authoritarian models. Oh, I got it off Amazon. I couldn't find it at Barnes and Noble. I love going there. I want to go to a brick and mortar store to pick up a page-turning book. I have a Kindle, but it's just not the same. And it didn't take long to get to me. I think it kind of did. It took a couple weeks. And since they have, I said this earlier, and since they have recently monetized my YouTube channel so that I can include shopping, I only intend to do, like, if I can bring y'all sales, like something's on sale type, I will do that. And if we can pre-plan the book club so you guys can read with me or read ahead and we can talk about it, that I think would be way cool. And anyway, so take a screenshot if you're on your phone and then get you this book. It's good to be able to pass on to folks too when you're done. All right, from the great oil hoax and the CIA-style brainwashing, and one of the Iranian guys just said oil is naturally produced and there's an infinite supply, but they've applied scarcity to it as a commodity. All right, the great oil hoax and CIA-style brainwashing, the psychological sciences have followed the route initially outlined by the 1945 Dr. John Rawlings Rees, the Grand Master of Psy-War Counterinsurgency. In his book, The Shaping of Psychiatry by War, Rees calls for the development of psychiatric shock troops in order to develop methods of political control based upon driving the majority of the human population towards psychosis. Gosh, that's ominous. And this reminds me of Mind War. And there's the guy who co-wrote that with the Satanist general is now on the board of TPUSA. Right. The fact that they call it fossil fuel is in itself a psyop. Let's see, where was I? Okay, the human population towards psychosis through procedures of so-called programmed behavioral modification. He proposed this to render the population submissive under the post-World War II economic world order. Rees told a group of U.S. Army psychiatrists in 1945, quote, "If we propose to come out into the open and to attack the social and national problems of our day, then we must have shock troops, and these cannot be provided by psychiatry based wholly in institutions." Did I read that right? Yeah. "We must have mobile teams of psychiatrists who are free to move around and make contact with the local situation in their particular area." I remember I had CPTSD. I had trouble. My marriage was falling apart. I had been taking care of my father, who died a month after my second, but my first with my husband was born. Everything was heavy all at once. I went to a psychiatrist who gave me a bullshit diagnosis, and he told me I needed to adopt the mentality of Hillary Clinton. And I asked him if he was sure. And let's just say I challenged him with everything I've known of Hillary Clinton. And then I heard after the fact somebody say modern psychiatry is paying somebody like $120 an hour to go and argue with them until you agree with their leftist ideology. And I realized I would never go back. And I've been doing great ever since. I feel like we all just need Jesus a little bit. And I know there's some of you on here who aren't believers, but I'll pray for you and love you regardless. And that whole mentality is new for me as well, but everything's changed since. So for the better. Hoopla free library app. Oh. Luke 10:19. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions. That's why I have the scorpion next to my Sacred Heart. I can't believe you just said that. There's my Sacred Heart and my scorpion. Ain't got nothing on me. And over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Amen. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful for me. That was beautiful for me. I got that scorpion because I am Scorpio, and then I came to know after the fact, and how serendipitous that they were placed right by them, like right next to each other. So, and I know that tattoos are frowned upon, but anyway, that kind of made me giddy. Luke 10:19. I'll have to remember that. Okay. We were talking about shrinks, psychiatry based on a whole blah, blah, blah particular area. Okay, Rees's logic is clear. For true mental health, there must be a complete transformation of society along the lines of rational selection. But as he laments in his book, quote, "Many don't see reality this way, including most workers who believe that any method of selection is a mechanism by which the wicked capitalist aims to get more work out of the workers. And that argument dies hard. In the Reesian worldview, such naysayers, along with anyone who engages in strikes or subversive activities, are themselves neurotic, desperately in need of treatment, but unfortunately unable to see that they are all ill. Excuse me. In such a world of unwitting neurotics, psychiatry, the only arbiter of sanity, can be excised only by a cabal in every country. Groups of psychiatrists linked to each other, prepared to muster all their weapons and influence for a move, quote, into political and governmental field. Only a conspiracy of psychiatrists, as Rees meant when he spoke of his mission, could blind a society where it's possible for people of every social group to have treatment when they need it, even when they do not wish it, without the necessity to invoke the law. For Rees, the construction of that cabal became his lifelong mission. As L. Marcus writes in his excellent investigative piece, Reesian's methods relay completely and consciously on the destruction of the mental life and world society and a forced march into universal sadism. Within this lies their affinity, men as beasts whose minds, according to Tavistock, are something to be manipulated and destroyed. Since then, different methodologies of psychological warfare developed at Tavistock Institute have been the central features of the activities of a worldwide set of interlocking think tanks in consultative, in consultative capacity and special commissions, government agencies, and corporations. I hope you can't hear that. The developmental studies and pilot projects with the clear-cut objective of shaping political techniques of social control. Rees and Tavistock organized their cabal according to public dictum. We are not large, but well placed. Rees had a clear understanding of power structures and organizing key individuals who will in turn spread ideas and influence. When we speak of psychological warfare, we are often speaking of ways to make the enemy afraid. And in order to do so, we must understand an enemy's psyche. So that brings me to think about Operation Popeye, Project Popeye, where they made it rain in Vietnam. And they did that to demoralize the enemy, but it also did our troops, and to wash out their foxholes and dirt roads and so forth. But weather manipulation, that's ridiculous. That's a conspiracy theory. Anyway, what makes them love, hate, fight, or run? Let me read that again. When we speak of psychological warfare, we are often speaking of ways to make the enemy afraid. And in order to do this, we must understand an enemy's psyche, what makes them love, hate, fight, and run. That enemy might be foreign or domestic, an army of men, or an enraged mass of workers. And in order to find an effective antidote, Tavistock and company need to understand how this enemy will react under stress. Will he fight harder or simply surrender? Or will he start making errors in judgment, winning the war for the enemy in a manner of speaking? The costliest mistakes of psychological warfare operations are always those made in ignorance of an enemy's mindset. And I feel like that's happening now. People are noticing. I got an account strike for the hashtag The Great Noticing on TikTok. Yes, well, I mess up, and I have dyslexia, and I have dyspraxia. Yes. Okay, where? Tavistock and company need to understand how blah, blah, blah. Yes. Or he will start, okay. I'm going to start that at Tavistock and company need to understand how this enemy will react under stress. Will he fight harder or simply surrender? Or will he start making errors in judgment, winning the war for the enemy in a manner of speaking? The costliest mistakes of psychological warfare operations are always those made in ignorance of the enemy's mindset. This implies a deep knowledge of human psychology by Reesian's shock troops, a knowledge which is itself a kind of black art. And since this is a war of perceptions, of worldviews, it is important that the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the sociologists and anthropologists These unidentified little gray men in flannel suits working for Tavistock understand the impact of art sucks these days. Music in general, even metal, like if it's not underground or, I mean, hip hop has been used. Like they just had something out recently, Sexy Red. If you've ever heard of her, it's because she's so obnoxious and crude. She had a baby and filmed a music video where she's twerking, holding her newborn in the hospital. And it turns out she's a CIA operative, and her role, I guess, was imperative to cultural something or other. But it plays into this big time. She's a shock troop. That's my new term. I see people acting out, acting wild. I'm gonna be like, there's a shock troop. Hashtag shock troops. Laura Loomer. Oh, anyway, so yeah, as Peter Lavenda writes in Sinister Forces, quote, eventually, the temptation will arise to test some of these principles on the domestic population. After all, with those mindsets, are we the most familiar with but our own? After all, with whose mindsets are we the most familiar with but our own? What better place to test new theories of psychological warfare than among our native population? As Rees said in 1945, wars are not won by killing one's opponents, but by understanding or destroying his morale whilst maintaining one's own. Excuse me, I had lunch right after my last one, so I'm a little bit burpy. One of the key individuals involved in behavior modification was psychologist Kurt Lewin. Lewin was the father of group dynamics and one of Rees's first cadre of recruits who began his career at Cornell University, where he worked on systematic series of studies of the effect of social pressure on the eating habits of children. He came to the United States in 1933, a refugee from Nazi Germany. Lewin, like many other German intellectuals, was forced out of Germany, not because of any basic political differences, but as a sacrifice to Hitler's divide and conquer anti-Semitism. Lewin, in fact, is noted for his refinement of the Nazi-formulated leaderless group technique into a sophisticated tool of counterinsurgency. One of the lesser-known facets of Lewin's work is related to psychological warfare programs, especially showing proper relations between psychological warfare, target setting, field operations, and evaluative reconnaissance. His first overt assignment was to utilize group decision-making in changing food preferences away from meat towards whole wheat bread as substitutes. Oh my. The following passages from this book, his book, Time, Perspective, and Morale, illustrates his understanding of psychological warfare. One of the main techniques for breaking morale through a strategy of terror consists in exactly this tactic. Keep the person hazy as to where he stands and just what he may expect. If, in addition, frequent vacillations between severe disciplinary measures and promises of good treatment, together with spreading of contradictory news, make the cognitive structure of the situation utterly unclear, when the individual may cease to even know when a particular plan would lead towards or away from his goal. Under these conditions, even those who have definite goals and are ready to take risks will be paralyzed by severe inner conflicts in regards to what to do. Oh my goodness. All right. And none of these comments ever post, and I click to post the live comments with my videos, but it just doesn't. Anyway, doesn't happen. Lewin was the first to realize through close observations of his tested cadres that the imposition of fascist-like forms of small group organization and corporatist structural reforms could induce fascist ideology in a subject population. Kind of like the roadblocks in Minnesota right now. They're saying you can't enter our neighborhoods unless you show us ID, but they claim that voter ID is racist and that those illegal immigrants are their neighbors. It's very hypocritical. In a sane and moral society, Lewin's proposals would be used for toilet paper, and Lewin himself would have been put under protective psychiatric care. Instead, he was given a lot of money, U.S. citizenship, and a grant from the Rockefellers to craft social engineering projects. And this says right here by his name, from the author of the true story of the Bilderberg Group. And I know the Rockefellers are part of that. All right. Lewin proposed that through a use of small group self-brainwashing techniques, a more efficient form of fascist dictatorship could be established. The ratio and visibility of a horde of jackbooted enforcers, characteristic of the Nazi regime, could be reduced by creating fascist forms of small, self-administering community groups. They see themselves as existing by means of their ability as individuals to influence the behavior of those immediately around them. The result, through Lewin, would be a more efficient form of fascist regime that was the result, thought Lewin, would be a more efficient form of fascist regime with the superficial appearance of special democratic forms. In other words, if the atomized individual's world is converted into a controlled environment which conforms to such fascist structural reforms, the victim's mind will discover that only its potential paranoid self provides it with the means of agreement with the controversial environment. In other words, fascism is the world desired in the paranoid dreams of the id. What is undeniable is that Rees and Tavistock were seriously organizing a cabal to take over the councils of those who are those who are attempting to reestablish the world after the war. Given the training of military, psychiatric, and other hardcore fascist cadres, the establishment of a fascist political order would proceed, according to Rees-Lewin Tavistockian model in the following steps. 1. Break down the existing democratic constitutional institutions. The military and police force would be reorganized for civil action, as they are now in the United States. One of the lesser-known actions being readied by the government revolves around the replacement of ordinary state and local police forces by a national counterinsurgency police force modeled on Hitler's SD Gestapo, and such as the Royal Canadian Mounted Polices in Canada. At the same time, existing mass institutions will be destroyed by spontaneously organized insurgency. Spontaneously is quoted. Local community control groups would be used to destroy board-based political institutions. Among these recruits to fascist community control, gangs and counter-gangs of terrorists would propagate crime and mutual terroristic confrontations, with both sides under the control and direction of behind-the-scenes intelligence operatives. This programmed insurgency of gangs and counter-gangs mixed with the doses of police-controlled terrorist gangs create the political conditions in which the majority of the population are more readily tolerant or even demands various degrees of military and police government, thus creating your democratic fascist regime. Oh my goodness. And everything I've been reading in the protocols written in 1905, this is it playing out in 2015. Eliminate through subversion, assassination. 2. These are the steps coming from Tavistock, by the way. Okay, eliminate through subversion, assassination, military intervention, embargoes, or popular and spontaneous uprisings, the regime that has outlived its usefulness, and appoint democratic civilian government. The appointed democratic government can now function only within the limits defined for by its representatives of a supranational agency. The specific topics towards the establishing of fascism with a democratic face are as follows. 1. Area population psychological studies. During World War II, the Anglo-American Psychological Warfare Services developed a number of studies of specific neurotic susceptibilities of various national cultures. The most famous of these was the so-called Strategic Bombing Survey. It was conceived as a basis for coordinating Allied bombings of Germany with propaganda and other psychological warfare campaigns against the morale of various enumerated strata of the Third Reich's population, and was the precursor of CIA-led Vietnam's Operation Phoenix, which was a genocide operation in South Vietnam against supporters of the Viet Cong. In a nutshell, strategic bombing surveys mapped out the best ways to destroy the morale of a civilization, a civilian population at the lowest cost. Number 2, the media. The use of control and major media news and cultural media as instruments of inducing desired forms of partial insanity among large populations. In general, by controlling the editorial policies, the news slant concerning national and international issues. The key news agencies and main mass circulating media determines what the population generally knows and considers credible. Deliberate and habitual falsification of information is a way of creating desensitization effects in the mass populations by causing socially accredited interpretations of cause and effect relations to violate sensuous rational interpretation of experience. This is furthermore supplemented by it literally says that. So this is furthermore supplemented, I'll skip one of the is's, by the introduction of programmed subliminal psychological material whose predetermined effect is to accentuate infantile impulses among targeted portions of the population, such as human interests, stories, which are relatively more gratifying to the infantile impulses and which de-emphasize a rational and scientific overview. 3. Local community control. The object of local community control as a fascist counterinsurgency tactic is to fragment the subject population into relatively hermetic political groupings, hermetically sealed, narrowing the scale of the groups by separation according to race, sex, language background, regional background, national origin, recreational interests, age groups, and neighborhood. Setting such groups into competition against each other under the conditions of general austerity is an effective Lewinite technique for introducing or inducing self-brainwashing among these groups and progressive psychological deterioration towards polymorphous, perverse pseudo-families and outright criminal psychosis. Clinical psychosis, not criminal. Potentially criminal. The first degree of brainwashing is accomplished by setting local community autonomy into principled opposition to big business, technology, and progressive programs meant to improve the lives within the community. Programs with emphasis on technological advancements are denounced as efforts of outsider elitist groups to interfere in the autonomous affairs of the local group. At that point, the community group has become functionally semi-psychotic and clinically paranoid as a group, to the extent that the members restrict their social identity to within such a group. The effort to adjust to the group ideals induces corresponding pathological states in the member. Quote, by setting such groups into by setting such groups into competition and by splitting the group internally through sex, race, income, etc., the paranoia is intensified. The movement towards semi-psychotic is increased as smaller and smaller subgroups within the community find themselves in cutthroat hostility towards one another. The application of task, and that's why Christianity is so freaking frowned upon right now, because that goes against every principle. The application of task-oriented small group brainwashing techniques to leaderless groups. Quote, these groups operate on the basis of an environment of reduction in real-time levels and working conditions. Under the conditions of austerity, the brainwashing consists in getting the workers to make up for the part of the lost standard income rates by ingenuously speeding themselves up, by recycling the employed and the unemployed in large-scale relocation programs and introduction of group work incentives and performance rewards competition known among competing groups, not known among, just performance reward competition among competing groups. Transforms the small production team into a potentially self-brainwashing group. Under these conditions, semi-psychosis and psychosis cause the group to voluntarily attain degrees of intensification of labor, which cannot be forced from sane labor. The members of such self-brainwashing leaderless groups work teams, oh my gosh. The members of such self-brainwashing leaderless group work teams emulate the racehorse syndrome, driving hysterically towards literally suicidal work pace. Tavistock Institute and University of Pennsylvania are two of the best-known centers for such experimental practices. Yeah. Oh, this stuff is so heavy, and it's like plain to see if it's not spelled out in front of you. You know, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. One of the key areas of population control is counterinsurgency. Those familiar with the adage that nobody ever leaves the CIA except 6 feet under the ground may have wondered how such a control could come to be exerted. The answer lies in part due to the insidious methods of Dr. John Rawlings, Rees, and his Nazi predecessors. Peter Kuski explains, quote, before a potential agent has ever been accepted for training by the CIA, he has already been effectively brainwashed during the selection. Rees's leaderless groups were, in reality, groups of candidates artfully manipulated by outside programmers in completely contrived and controlled situations. In 1946, Nathan Klein, who was at the time served at Warshipping Administration of the United States, described an officer selection process that Rees personally set up for the U.S. Marines shortly after the war. Peter Kuski, in The Shaping of the Anglo-American SS by War, explains, 20 candidates were gathered together in a group and told their futures as a squad in the Marines was dependent upon beating the record of all other Marine units who had tried to solve the problem they were about to be presented. Then they were told to imagine that they were on a deserted island and the unassembled life raft before them had just drifted ashore. With suitable appeals to their team spirit, they were instructed to break the record in getting the raft assembled and off the island. Psychological warfare specialists standing on the sidelines observed carefully the approaches of each individual in the group to the problem. Did he immediately rush into the trial and error mode of operation or stand back and size up an overall solution and situation? Did he exhibit gung-ho enthusiasm and motivation or withdrawal and alienation from the situation? Which man would move for leadership and manage to enforce group discipline and draw out team spirit? When they had tabbed their leader, a ruse was used, such as an alleged invasion on the other side of the island, to pull him out together with 3 or 4 others. This way, a new situation was developed where the psychological warfare experts could observe the rise of a new team leader. One purpose of these insidious and artificial schemes was to encourage mindless team spirit and to select the most rabid and competent team leaders. Another aim, when combined with the candidate's personal history questionnaire and other written tests, was to compile a psychological profile of each man for later use. Again, citing Peter Kresge, it was still necessary, however, to destroy whatever real ego strength the candidate still possessed. This was the intention behind Reese's stress tests. One such test was used by Joe Gardner of the OSS. In the brainwashing scheme, the candidate was given 12 minutes to construct a cover story to be presented to interrogators who caught him stealing government documents marked secret from the government office in Washington. The candidate was told that this was a make or break test, encouraged to internalize a plausible new identity, and warned that his answers to his interrogators must not compromise OSS organizational security or blow his cover. When the candidate was finished thinking up his cover story, he was brought into a dark room, a spotlight blinding him, and 3 agents facing him. For the next several minutes, these brainwashing specialists would almost always tear to shreds the victim's hastily concocted cover story by various tough cop, soft cop methods, well-prepared staccato catch questions, physical brutality, etc. Almost without exception, the candidate was left dazed and confused. Then the brainwashing agents would abruptly break off the interrogation, saying, "We now have abundant evidence that you have not been telling the truth. That's all." After the interrogation board has ostentatiously engaged in some whispering back and forth would come, "Your name is Jones, isn't it? It is our decision, Jones, that you have failed this test." The crestfallen candidate was instructed to go upstairs. There, a staff member would pretend to commiserate emotions and fear in the pleasant atmosphere following the earlier great tension. Most of the broken candidates would readily open up and talk about their childhood in response to questions like, "As a psychologist, I've been wondering whether there weren't times in your childhood somewhat similar to this. And when you concealed petty things from your mother when she questioned you." That all comes from Freud. That was a book I highly recommend, the Sigmund Freud and the Jewish mystical tradition. That one was crazy. And bolstered my decision to homeschool my children. Usually the candidate would naively and pathetically ramble on about his mother, his early sexual experiences, and etc. By this time, OSS not only had its desired psychological profile, it also had crushed the last vestiges of genuine ego strength in its victimized potential agent, and was now in a position to manipulate and program him almost at will to cooperate with the team. The most up-to-date utilization of these Anglo-American SS brainwashing methods was unwittingly revealed by the Sunday Times of London on January 27. I wonder what year. It doesn't say. Maybe we already talked about a year. 1946. Excuse me. In an article about the U.S. Army Special Forces entitled "The New Secret Service," the Times described the counter-interrogation techniques now used. The 4-stage, how long have I been on here? Doesn't say. Does it say for you? Can you let me know? I'm going to read till chapter 1 is over, but I'm just curious. Oh my, we're going to be here for a bit. That much left. 10 pages. All right, the new Secret Service. The Times described the counter-interrogation techniques now used. Quote, "The 4-stage brainwashing program starts with testing for sensitivity of the nervous system through flashing words or symbols on a screen for fractions of a second." Like in your shorts. Or in Fight Club. In order to find if physical torture or isolation in solitary confinement would better break him, phase 2 is the breakdown of Troop's identity by teaching him how to develop a plausible alter ego or an alibi. The third phase involved brutal group attack or self-criticism sessions used to further destroy ego, strength to supposedly simulate enemy interrogation, and the final phase of instruction in beating lie detector involved, amongst other things, pairing strong electronic shocks or ordinary everyday words. The technique, which would have obvious value for the CIA in preparing brainwashed veterans for hit squads, is described under its counter-interrogation cover as follows. These ordinary words acquire an emotional meaning for the man trained for a certain mission. Thus, in an interrogation with a mixture of control and conditions, the man's response will appear chaotic and misleading. The OSS/CIA wasn't the only one using the latest and most up-to-date systems and techniques of counter-interrogation and agents' indoctrination. Soon after, Tavistock developed newer, more and more sophisticated methods of mind control. Tavistock used various techniques of coercion, hypnosis, and the use of mind-altering drugs to achieve brainwashing for their victims. Are they not going to talk about MK Ultra? All of which applied the same basic format. Well, I guess MK Ultra was what Tavistock is for the United States and Canada, because Tavistock was in Europe. I have to plug my computer in. Oh no, it's not going to reach. Oh, crap. Well, we're going for a ride. I'm having a cramp in my foot right now. Okay, Charlie horse. I'm having this. Oh, there it goes. A Charlie horse. It was pulling my toe. It's making my big toe go out like this. Ouch. Those are so bizarre. All right. Oh. Okay. Interesting things. There's this like piece down here. I'm trying to find my place. There we go. The smelly cheese programming. Oh my God. Just a sec. We'll get there. Sorry, I'm holding my foot right now because it's still cramping. I should have been more prepared with the charging. All right. Tavistock used various techniques in coercion, hypnosis, and the use of mind-altering drugs to achieve brainwashing for their victims, all of which applied the same basic format. Let me see what I can do here. Okay. Induce massive physical or psychological stress in an individual and then relieve that stress through repeated vacillations between stress and relief. The subject, be they army recruits, intelligence agents, or general population, eventually became intensely suggestible. The OSS pristine interrogation dark room literally became the house of horrors for the newly selected recruits of the British MI6. One such secret location reserved for special government projects was at Powergen in Solihull, UK. Solihull, sorry, UK folks. The year is 1979. The young British intelligence recruits entering this building had no idea of the hell that lay before them. Writes Richard Tomlinson, former MI6 spy who was part of the program. No idea that they would be forced to become slaves to a demonic mind control program run by MI6 and sanctioned by Royal Arch Freemasonry through the Tavistock Institute. It was at PowerGen in 1979 that a 21-year-old recruit, Richard Tomlinson, attended his first INSET British intelligence and was first shown a passport photograph of Vladimir Putin, supplied to him by one of Oleg Gordevsky's contacts. Gordevsky, the highest-ranking KGB officer to escape the West, was a Royal Arch Freemason. The course was run by Stella Rimington, MI5, and John Scarlett, the overall MI6 controller of the modules. The two Tavistock designed programs for British intelligence graduate trainees were 1. The MI6 Beast programming, 2. The Smelly Cheeses programming, in conjunction with Jonathan Livingstone Seagull. The first one refers to the Beast computer program placed into every recruit's mind control programming during recruitment. Their recruitment training at both MI5 and MI6. One of the tasks set the graduate trainees and mind control programmers who were running the Royal Arch Freemasonry course was a treasure hunt. The treasure hunt was to test their spycraft skills and general sadism. Part of this course was based on an old Roman game which the soldiers had played with their prisoners, the Rite of Saturn. In short, it was a sadomasochistic game whereby the recruits were tortured and abused in a similar fashion to the Roman prisoners. This was called the Via Dolorosa. Via Dolorosa was a Tavistock-designed water torture. The programmers in British intelligence brings to you a near-death experience in order to make you obey. Have you seen The OA? That was on Netflix, Britt Marling's show. Fantastic. Seems to be piecing together a little bit of this. I can't even see what time it is. Oh, it's been an hour and 12 minutes. I see it now. I don't know what time it is, though. Let's see. 2:44. We're fine. It is also a way of separating the weak from the strong. The programmers torture the recruits repeatedly in order to break their spirits. The key, an initiate is worthless to them if they are capable of disobeying orders from above. Some people never recover from the experience. Symbolically, this is the birth, death, and resurrection process, the stages of the cross. Most initiates are then taken to Jerusalem to walk the Via Dolorosa in order to reinforce this programming. They have become Christ-like. And here it is, Smelly Cheese. Smelly Cheeses is programmed in via the reading and enactment of The Three Men in a Boat, a Jerome K. Jerome novel published in 1889. Chapter 4 of Jerome's novel relates how it is important, whilst traveling and carrying smelly cheeses, not to touch the goods, nor afterwards, once one has arrived at the destination. All smugglers are most worried about the safety of their drugs contraband, and therefore the importance of this part of the programming. In his self-published unofficial biography, The Golden Chain, that reminded me of Mitch Snow, who uncovered, he was a whistleblower, uncovering how the government was helping smuggle drugs into the U.S., which subsequently reminds me of the Fort Bliss whistleblower who blew the whistle on the government smuggling children and then abusing them in their camps. Anyway, in his self-published unofficial biography, The Golden Chain, Tomlinson relates that the other graduate trainee programmers were given huge electric shocks after training, i.e., the enactment of this little drama would then be instructed to sit on chairs facing a large window. This was relaxation to de-stress the brain. The young men would sit there and grind their teeth, normal response to ECT, whilst gazing blankly at the sky. Mr. Blue Sky by ELO was sometimes played at this point to rejuvenate their spirits. I'm going to have to go look up that song. Electric Light Orchestra. Ding, ding, ding. All right. The main point behind MI6 Smelly Cheeses programming was that prospective recruits to British intelligence were sent on gap years around the world on various missions, i.e., to courier contraband on British-dominated smuggling rings, which had their origins in the British Empire's snake lines, in clear reference to the Asian drug recruits, especially African diamond roots. Smelly Cheeses programming was used in parallel with Jonathan Livingstone's Seagull. Why? It's not that dude's Seagull, that's his last name, but I keep reading it that way. Why? As Tomlinson writes, to encourage and train those who had been picked to remote view and then come back like homing pigeons when called by the programmer. This is MK Ultra. MI6, MK Ultra, HIJK. I wonder which came. MK Ultra was 70s, 80s, or 80s, 90s. This is 70s, 80s. Fast forward to the late spring 1980, Russian monastery compound Ayin Kerem, Jerusalem property of Russian Orthodox Church. Back in 1980, it was run as a nunnery, but was known to the KGB as a KGB spy center. According to Tomlinson, Vladimir Putin and other KGB Royal Arch Freemasons stayed within this high-security compound. The British intelligence recruits mainly stayed at the youth hostel behind the St. John's Church in the center of Ain Kerem. It is located partly up the mountain, which overshadows a town and backs into a pine forest. What is mind-boggling is the upside-down universe of smoke and mirrors is that in the evening, the graduates would sit on the veranda of these buildings with their KGB Russian counterparts to smoke, drink vodka, and shoot the breeze. Tomlinson spoke Russian and acted as a de facto translator for the group. Tomlinson explains that this was the first time that the future president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the now former MI6 agent had met. Fast forward to 93, Poland. With the Soviet Union disintegrating into oblivion, Poland became the world's largest flea market in the world of intelligence, possessing large mineral wealth and large oil reserves, plus more timber than the Amazon, not to mention an immense stockpile of Soviet-era weapons. The country was being asset stripped. The strategy was intended to topple Russia into anarchy, towards the point where Russia could not oppose Western military operations. No one really knew who was working for which agency or which agency was allied to whom, in what turned out to be a smash-and-grab gunfight. One could name MI5, MI6, the CIA, and the IRA as but a few in this free-for-all. The desperate dash to acquire information, drug, guns, anything, you name it. Just about every intelligence agency and mafia organization was in on the game. Everything was on sale. Truckloads of Soviet rubles motored down autobahns. Many were used in complex swap operations in which billions of narco dollars were laundered on behalf of the NDRANGHETA, Ndrangheta, the Calabrian Mafia. Numerous prime Western banks, such as Bank of New York, Goldman Sachs, Fleet Financial, and Bank of Boston, looted up to $500 million. Tomlin explains, Vladimir Putin had lost his job as KGB controller of the Stasi in East Berlin. There was a famine in St. Petersburg, and KGB owed their employees several months of salaries. Whole families were starving in the city, and Vladimir Putin's own family was no exception to this rule. Putin needed help and reached out to the very people who supposedly were his enemies, such as John Scarlett, MI6 Moscow station. Like Putin, Scarlett was a Royal Arch Freemason. Tomlinson is unable to shed any light on the deal that Scarlett struck with Putin, but he does add several nuggets of information. Putin, according to Tomlinson, had been under MI6 Royal Arch Freemasonry mind control since 1979, and had been one of their operatives within the KGB until 1994. Putin needed safe passage for himself and his family out of a situation in St. Petersburg, which was rapidly deteriorating. Scarlett had agreed to set up a new identity for him in the UK as a teacher of German, as Putin spoke German fluently. Putin's 2 daughters and his wife would follow him at a later date. However, somewhere along the line, Scarlett reneged on the deal. Instead of safe passage out of Russia, MI5, for some reason unknown, had decided to torture and then murder Putin as soon as he set foot on British soil. But British MI5 underestimated future Russian President Vladimir Putin. Through his extensive network of contacts, he learned of MI5's real agenda and called the deal off, returning to Russia instead. In 1994, Putin struck back. This year, MI6 laptops began to disappear in Europe. Putin and his associates were tracking down MI6 senior officers who held the color-coded information of the tailored mind control programs of their officers and agents within their laptops. Tomlinson explained that once the codes are broken, it is relatively simple to control any of the operatives listed, as well as guess how to control others who were indoctrinated in a similar way, and then turn them against their masters. The main clue was to be found on an antique British typewriter, 55 Imperial 55, at the Jerusalem Prison Museum. The code on the typewriter keys run as follows. I don't want to read that, but you see. The 10 sequences above account for 10 different branches of Royal Arch Freemasonry infiltrated British intelligence departments. From its inception, MI1, to the current public form of MI5 and MI6. For example, Clue 7, Zygote, Zain Chet Tzaddik, and in Hebrew, which stands for the Royal Genome Project. And Clue 9 is Sex Kittens, SKTC. These departments are all still in existence today. Good grief. The KGB Royal Arch Freemasons were one of these departments in this tarantula-like Masonic organization. Or have you heard of the octopus? I think there's a Netflix documentary about the octopus. All the legs of the octopus. The CIA wasn't far behind the British MI6 in their approach to brainwashing. The agency realized that the more maverick approach involved the role of social factors in skewing the minds of the agents to the agency's needs. In other words, individual brainwashing tactics, such as electroshock therapy or the use of drugs, though powerful, were no match for the power of suggestion in enforcing behavior. So Rees and his partners explored the deepest recesses of the human mind, adopting the object relation approach of universal literature, which emphasized imagery and symbolism rather than instinctual drives and psychic energy. Through the use of associated theory, the idea was to recreate the imaginary world of an immortal piece of literature in the minds of the test subjects, using the work of art for immoral purposes. Under Rees and Tavistock, these techniques became a testing ground for the new forms of institutionalized psychological control. Okay. The Bluebird of Happiness. That's a Bukowski poem. Right? There's a bluebird in my heart. The land of memory has always been the primary objective of mind control and counterinsurgency operations. There is a phrase which is perhaps not used much these days, as it was in the tender years of the 20th century, the bluebird of happiness. What many people do not realize, and did not realize even then, was that this term had its origins in The Bluebird, 1909, the most famous work by a Belgian Nobel Prize-winning author and dramatist, Maurice Maeterlinck. In this play, 2 children set off in search of the bluebird of happiness. This search leads them on many adventures, a kind of Enneatic quest for the Holy Grail. Peter Lavenda, in his brilliant book Sinister Forces, explains that many of the motifs of Maeterlinck's play are repeated in the CIA's search for the perfect mind control, a search that began with Project Bluebird. Hang on a sec. I wonder how long ago he left. All right. I'm glad you guys have been chatting. Blessed are the cheesemakers. Yeah, exactly. Oh, right. Do you know what? I don't know. Should I keep going just so we have all of chapter 1 in one video? I still have 6 pages. Oh, he must have just left, huh? All right. So many of Maeterlinck's plays are repeated in the CIA search for perfecting mind control, a search that began with Project Bluebird. That's where I ended. The story, which begins on Christmas Eve, involved 2 children, Till and his younger sister, Mytil, who will, I'm going to say Ty and My, if they say those names again, Tyl, and Mytyl. Title and Mytil, who set out on a quest to find the bluebird of happiness, impoverished children of a woodcutter who live across from a great house, live across, my goodness, my brains, who live across from a great house with very rich children. They understand that they are too poor to receive Christmas presents that year. In the middle of the night, there is a knock on the door, and an old woman, who later introduces herself as the fairy Baraloon, asks them if they have the grass that sings or the bird that is blue. Baraloon has a sick daughter who will not get well unless the bluebird of happiness is found. The children, eager to help, set off on a quest for the mysterious bird and to visit their dead grandparents. With the fairy's help, in order to visit the dead, however, they have to pass through the land of memory, which is on the way to the bluebird. I am taking my time to explain Maeterlinck's work in order to help the reader understand how secret societies, intelligence agencies, and governments use literature to indoctrinate their cadres into becoming mind control slaves to the elite. The Bluebird is one such program devised by Tavistock specifically for the CIA. Just as in Maeterlinck's play, the recruits are given a magic hat. On this hat is a diamond set squarely at the center. When Title presses it, he will see the soul of things. If he turns it to his right, he sees the past, to the left, the future, and as long as he wears the hat, it is invisible. Those who read Eastern mysticism will no doubt grasp at once that the diamond is the adamantine substance, which in position on the hat is a reference to the third eye, which, when opened, gives the devotee access to secret information and occult powers. The search for the bluebird will give Title and mind control recruits these powers as they walk through the land of memory. The Palace of the Night, a graveyard, and an enchanted forest, eventually, of course, the children arrive back at their home on Christmas morning, where they discover that the bluebird of happiness has been there all along. However, for Tavistock, the play is full of occult and esoteric elements of a necromancy treasure quest, that children, virgins, are the ideal seers according to the occult texts of the Middle Ages, goes unmentioned. The moral is uplifting and spiritual, conservative and charming. A fairy tale replete with talking animals and trees and kindly grandparents. The quest itself, though, is enlightening for other reasons. See, I love that. Thank you. I wonder if you guys can tell that I'm dyslexic. No, my hair is over here. I am. I read to my kids every night. I had a kiddo who was delayed a little with speech, and so reading has become a big part of our. I've always read, but reading aloud is difficult and something that's important for me to keep my brain in check, I guess. Land of Memory, of course, was the target of the Bluebird Project, to enter the land in another person's mind, to go through the drawers, rearranging the furniture, and leave unnoticed. Thank you. That means so much. Yeah, it's good that you felt that way about TikTok. Once the Korean War started and American POWs began making bizarre pro-communist statements after a mysterious sojourn in Manchuria, the world was introduced to the concept of brainwashing, and the Bluebird took on enormous importance. If the communists could alter the consciousness of American soldiers when the war took on then the war took on a completely different nature. It became a war of culture against culture, of atheism against religion, of race against race, of dark against light. This was a war not to be fought by bullets alone. Psychological warfare operations were ramped up at the same time as Bluebird went into full swing. And what William Sargent would call in 1957 the battle for the mind began. Again, Mind War. I'm going to get that book next. I don't think I'll read it on here, but I will definitely read it. Maybe I will. You guys get to help me decide. Tavistock had obviously known of Maeterlinck's creation, just as Lewin and Rees had known of his other more obscure works, or of his studies of astrology, psychic phenomenon, and mysticism. Maeterlinck, there's an S in there. Maeterlinck's description of the land of memory had to strike a deep resonance in the mind of the Tavistock team as they embarked on the search for the key to the mysteries of human consciousness. And so the mind control programming begins. In the land of memory, a strange land enshrouded in mist and darkness, the two seekers find their grandparents, long deceased. Their grandparents tell them, "The last time you were here, let me see, when was it? It was on All Hallows, when the church bells were ringing." All Hallows, of course, is the Day of the Dead. They find a bluebird. When they return from the land of memory, the bird has turned completely black. Only the first trail has taken place, and Tidal and Midal have much further to go. The next stage in mind control is the Palace of the Night. It is somewhere more eerie and forbidding place than even the land of memory. Night is depicted as a kind of angel, a dark lady with wings in place of arms. The Palace of the Night is the domain of ghosts, sickness, and wars. One goes directly from the land of memory to the Palace of the Night, from unlocking the secrets of the memory to communing with the dead, controlling sickness, and becoming victorious in war. Bluebird and its associate programs, such as MK Ultra, there it is, and often, OFTEN. If I had a highlighter, I would highlight that. I haven't heard of often. Became involved in all aspects of behavior modification, hypnosis, drug-induced psychological states, and the creation of amnesia. What's her name? Ariana Grande talked about going to a clinic and getting her memories erased. Well, that was a fuzz. Floating. It was a feather. Can you see it? Anyway, I have a down blanket. Tidal finds a great door set in the rear of the Palace of Night and is told that he must never open it. The great dangers await those who rush in, and that no one who enters that room ever returns to the land of the living. Tidal, who is charged with the sacred quest of finding the bluebird, finally decides to open the door. And when he does so, he sees a beautiful garden, a waterfall, many wonderful things, and of bluebirds. He tries to grab as many as he can, and then he takes them out of the room. They turn to corpses in his arms. They cannot stand the light of day. The sessions continue. Both the brainwashing trainee and title must continue their quest, leaving the palace of the night for their next destination, the palace of luxury. Here, they are confronted by a scene of outrageous depravity as fat beings eat, drink, laugh, and carouse, beatific in their willful ignorance. As always, Tidal, with his magic diamond, secret knowledge not available to others, can see things as they really are. And by pressing the diamond, he perceives that these things are miserable fools, and thus, exposed, they retreat to the miseries, a special place from whence they may never return. Of course, the CIA is seeing things as they really are, looking behind the curtain, behind the facade, and their entire program may be seen as Title's diamond. They put the magic diamond to use to see the human mind as it really is, to strip away a human being's conscious defense so that every secret, even highly classified government secrets that could cost the lives of many, would be revealed. From the luxury place, Tidal proceeds to the kingdom of the future. This is where he finds a land with children who are not yet born, dressed completely in blue like little scientists. They are occupied with the inventions that they will produce once they have been born on Earth. However, Tidal, as a living person, is not allowed in this kingdom, which is under the rulership of time. From the kingdom of the future, then, to the graveyard. This is much like any other cemetery, with tombstones and grass and silence. At midnight, he is to use his magic diamond once again to see the dead. In the midst of the darkness and impending horror, a clock in the distance chimes the hour. Tidal presses his diamond, frightened but willing to face the dead as the next in his series of trials before he can capture the bluebird. But instead of ghostly figures in shrouds and clinking chains, the scene changes. The tombs open, but instead of ghoulish entities, only flowers emerge. They had thought that ugly skeletons would rise from the earth and run after them. They had imagined all sorts of terrible things. And then, in the presence of the truth, they saw that all they had been told was a story and that death does not exist. The motto of the CIA, of course, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Is that really their motto? From the graveyard, Tidal wanders into the forest. During the quest, he has been accompanied by various other creatures who have been observing Tidal from a distance. Where did Midal go? Many of these creatures, most especially the cat, fear for their lives should Tidal be successful. The cat says, quote, "It is better to rely on one's self alone. In my cat life, all our training is funded on suspicion. I can see that it is just the same in the life of men. Those who confide in others are only betrayed. It is better to keep silent and to be treacherous one's self." End quote. This might have well been a personal motto of some of the sinister men who worked behind the scenes at Tavistock and the CIA. Men like John Rawlings Rees, Eric Trist, CIA Director Richard Helms, and the MK Ultra czar, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Loners, desperately private men who guarded the secrets of the nation and the secrets of their lives with equal passion, since the two were often inextricably intertwined. Their training certainly founded on suspicion. In the story, the cat leads Tidal into a trap in the forest, where he is set upon by the trees and the animals and has to fight for his life. He is saved at the last minute by Light, who warns him that man is alone against all the world. Finally, the leave-taking occurs, as the hour has grown late and the children return to their cottage miraculously as the clock strikes 8 on Christmas morning. This is the awakening, a constant theme for the CIA and Tavistock. Of course, when they awaken, the children realize that the bluebird has been in their home all along. Through an innocent child's tale, Tavistock brainwashers have embarked on a sacred quest that would lead them into humanity's deepest secrets. By delving into the universal, macrocosmic secrets of the human mind, they hope to uncover the specific, microcosmic secrets of their enemies. As above, so below. I don't even like saying that. As above, so below. Where is it? I said it again. Tavistock used their understanding of psychiatric methods to formulate and implement an action program based on such beliefs. Once the neurotic map of each individual was determined, Tavistock was able to set up a filtering mechanism that is different forms of brainwashing to select various neurotic types and place them in their appropriate settings. This is deeper symbolism involved in all the Tavistockian processes. Tidal and Midal were innocent virgin children, morally spotless, on an initiatic journey in the company of light. The men of Bluebird and later MK Ultra could hardly be considered in the same way. From the point of view of the ancient mystery religions, whose quests they were imitating, they were plumbing the depths of the abyss without having undergone the period of purification. Thus, their sins, their personal, private, specific sins, would come to haunt them in the days and weeks and years that would follow, soiling their reputations and forbidding them from entry into the inner temple. The psychopathic kernel of Tavistock's long-range vision is therefore this. The campaigner magazine's ICLC Strategic Studies, L. Marcus explains, the fascist structural reforms, local community control, and social contract are the assertions of the unconscious infantile realm at the expense of the relative rationality of former socializing ego ideals. Fascism is the world desired in the paranoid dreams of the id. Conversely, if the automized individual's world is converted into a controlled environment which conforms to such fascist structural reforms, the victim's mind will discover that only its potential paranoid self provides it with the means of agreement with that controlled environment. On one level, the technique was applied to the world of intelligence, but as far as more hideous uses was envisioned for it by the practitioners of the art of brainwashing. After the war, these techniques were put back into society and applied to real lives and real people. Tavistock had understood that the family was the most powerful psychoactive agent. One of their creations, therapeutic groups, which we will analyze in this section, provided the opportunity to tap the power of the family. The most advanced among the brutal practitioners of the new industrial psychology was Dr. John Rawlings Rees. Rees discovered that an unreal realm could be created, the social group. An individual is made to transfer his or her identity to the group, wherein they become subjects to the most intense forms of suggestion. And that's why they send kids to school, break up the family. You know, the left is now told you need to disown your family if you disagree. I guess the right's breaking up like that too now. You think I should finish? Oh, all the way. Finish the chapter. Gottlieb, yes. Ricky, you're back. I was wondering that too as I was reading it. I'm like, is this one of those things? I got a book called Tongue, and it was described in the title of the book as a cognitive, I just packed it too, dang it. Calamity or something, a cognitive. Anyway, and it seemed to be all coded, and it was, it said, by the time you're done reading this, you will have snapped out of any kind of brainwashing, encoded, symbolic. Anyway, I was thinking that with this, because it is definitely walking me through what they use and the stories they used. I don't remember where it was at all. Oh yeah, Rees, the social group, blah, 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 provided the individual's inner sense of real identity is destroyed and can be manipulated like a child. Okay. M. Minicino, in an article titled Low Intensity Operations, explained, A skilled group leader can use the group to create a powerful, albeit artificial, family environment. Once this environment is induced, a therapist can manipulate a member of the group, not by direct attacks, but by subtly manipulating the other members of the group, for example, through suggestion. If the victim has been sucked into thinking the group is something helpful or motherly, then when the environment has been manipulated to turn against him, it will tend to have the impact of deep motherly rejection. Rees and Tavistock understood through their extensive engagement in group work that manipulation based upon bourgeois concepts of the outside world as magical mother's fears was fundamental to mass control. In other words, the Institute looks for methods by which to manage populations by exploiting their ideology. By first creating numerous social groups and then setting such groups into competition and making all gains contingent on winning these at the expense of the contingency groups. A self-policing fascist social order could be established. It was merely necessary to atomize the subject population, employing an armamentarium of sociological and psychiatric weaponry to the effect of so dividing the people against itself, setting race against race, language group against language group, women's self-interest against men as oppressors, further subdivided them by professional category and so on, and to further subdivide them into small territorial communities of self-interest groups that the military forces are never confronted with more than a small material force represented by a hardcore resistant to the generally effective combination of sociological and psychiatric weapons of control. Man, because if you're outside of most social groups, you're considered fringe or crazy, dare I say. I just need to make sure I'm making some progress here. Yeah, okay. 5 more pages back and front. So one of the ways in which such practices were encouraged and used by Tavistock brainwashers involved increasing levels of productivity and the intensification of labor at the expense of one's health. In other words, Rockefeller induced self-motivated destruction of the self, a society of brainwashed zombies, content to subsist on the brink of starvation, performing sadomasochistic acts of sodomy for the perceptibly irrational sort of psychotic holocaust. Gosh, I'm saying all the words I can't say on YouTube. All of it's based on a sort of perverse Dionysian, sodomic, mindless fanaticism within the broader framework of Rees's Rockefeller model of fascist society. The purpose is to function under a spiraling reduction in standard income and working conditions. There is a method to this madness, however. For example, in an environment of downward spiraling standard of income and working conditions, higher and higher productivity is suggested as the group's goal, often at the expense of safety and physiological well-being of the group members. Anyone who protests is told they are maladjusted. The idea was to recreate a family dynamic or a dynamic of peer pressure in group therapy, where predetermined objectives were forced into the group through consensus or democracy in the language of these social engineers. The idea was that by attacking someone's sovereign identity in the group, that individual would forfeit their sovereignty to the group and become suggestible to the predetermined objectives. Such techniques play upon the vulnerable person's guilt, shame, and regret with both sledgehammer and scalpel. Humiliated by the group with only the unreal realm to judge from, the individual further degrades himself and accepts the verdict. He begins producing more. This is the malicious, disgusting kernel of co-participation, quality of life, co-determination, humanitization, human relations, or whatever other euphemism may be mustered, all under the banner of post-industrial society. A Ford Foundation-sponsored piece of garbage whose particular point as a counterinsurgency weapon of ideology, introduced the proto-fascist notion of zero growth. I stumbled on that paragraph. I'm sorry about that. Back to work. Who exposed who? Gottlieb. I did. She was my first rabbit hole. Amazing. I'm gonna have to read through these and take like screenshots so I can go through and rabbit hole with you. All right. We're on 2 hours now. Thanks for being here still, guys. In 1946, Reese Tavistock Rockefeller was formalized in the Rockefeller Memorandum, in which Brigadier General John Rawlings Reese exposed the full depth of his cabal and offered it to the family. The Rockefeller Foundation, which had been heavily funding Tavistock and Tavistock members since 1934, readily accepted. And the Tavistock Clinic, I wonder if my battery's charged up. Nope. The Tavistock Clinic was transformed into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and it's still operating. The Institute developed national and international operations under the heading Operation Research. Firstly, Rockefeller took many of the social scientists who had been involved in the bestial fascist war intelligence services and set them up on campuses in labor institutes funded by Rockefeller Foundation, National Institute of Mental Health, Army, Navy, Air Force, and large capitalist firm money, guidance, and projects. These labor institutes were created at the same time as the CIA. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council is part of the same network that Rockefeller was building to rule the world. Once the United States was replaced, Britain after the war as the world's strongest power. One of the key Tavistock projects was Rockefeller-sponsored Labor Institute, where behavior modification, intergroup motivation, teamworking, social dynamics, and productivity increasing were all studied from the psychological point of view to manipulate the great unwashed. They're in 4th and 5th grade right now. Buddha before bed. Noted. In the early 50s, Rockefeller had a network of labor institutes plus control of the Department of Labor to physically and psychologically control from top down the United States labor movement. But Rockefeller's greatest contribution to the labor cause had been the complete destruction of the labor movement. Its perversion and control through Rockefeller Tavistock orchestrated operations from civilian conservative groups to Works Progress Administration, WPA, from National Civics Federation, NCF, and American Federation of Labor, the AFL, where were labor movements in the United States always firmly under the control of the Rockefeller financial interests. For example, Samuel Gompers, the AFL's first president, helped form in the early 1900s the National Civics Federation. Quote, it believed in the supremacy of employers and the benevolence of capitalism and helped break strikes, recruit vigilantes, and conduct attacks against the working class. During the First World War, Gompers championed the vicious war labor board that crushed labor. Among the NCF leaders were Mark Hanna of the U.S. Steel Corporation and such Rockefeller followers as Charlie Elliott, members of the Board of Trustee, the Rockefeller Foundation, and president at Harvard. I know somebody named Mark Hanna. He's a musician. Another of the Rockefeller organizations was Steelworkers Organizing Committee, whose director was Philip Murray. Murray's right-hand man was Clinton Golden, who in 1947 joined the editorial board of Tavistock Human Relations magazine, and in the mid-50s became a member of the Rockefeller-controlled Ford Foundation. Yet another Rockefeller front was a Cornell IRL school-created coalition of labor union women, which held its first conference in Chicago in 1974. The group was intended to push affirmative action for women, pitting men against women in vicious job fights with millions being laid off. also pulling women out of the home so that kids were sent off to be programmed in the public school system. The three Rockefeller formed and funded and directed labor institutes, Tavistock, the ISR, and Cornell ILR, are only three of more than 200 to 300 that were started by the Rockefellers throughout the world after the Second World War. They included the Centre des études des problèmes humanins de travail and the Association pour la recherche, okay, it's French, et al. Intervention psychosociologues in France. The Industrial Research Institute in Bonn, Germany. Why didn't he put that in German? Why has he got to put it in friggin' French? The DGB, which is the German Trade Union, Department of Social Relations Institute, also in Germany. La Sociedad Argentine de Investigación Operativa, SADIO, the International Jewish Research Foundation on Human Relations in Israel. So they didn't put that in Israeli. And the Psychological Institute of Kyushu in Japan, to name a few. The list of Rockefeller influence is enormous. Between the Rockefeller family, longstanding control over the American Medical Association and American Psychiatric Association, and the encroachment of the CIA establishment into all branches of government, various governmental, including military funds, were used to push the development of brainwashing and to plant Rockefeller Tavistock protégés in key positions and institutions. For example, B.F. Skinner's position at Harvard was established in this way. Another Reese student, Dr. Kenneth Clark, moved into the Rockefellers' New York State Board of Regents and also into the key Black counterinsurgency post, MARC, of the Rockefeller-inspired and Rockefeller-controlled Ford Foundation. Why does he have to say that every time? I guess so we don't get lost in the Ford Foundation and associate it with Henry. Dr. Nathan S. Klein, one of the worst Reesian criminals, headed New York State's Rockland State Hospital, as well as held a key position at New York's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where a bored and old tradition of brainwashing survived. I need to know that I'm getting close. All right. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rushing. I just have to go help my mom again. And we're on 2 hours of this stream and 1 hour previous. No wonder I'm coughing. Okay, in fact, the techniques used in labor negotiations in Spain, France, Germany, and the United States, and most other Western countries come straight out of the Tavistock role-playing manual. It would do labor leaders some good to study Rockefeller Tavistock techniques for labor negotiations, or perhaps with a wink and a nod, they already do. Is that why the Spanish labor movement is a bad joke? Let's have a look. See, in the last couple of pages, I've been getting a little run down because it seems so historic and chronological and a list of names and institutes. And here we are back to being a human. First, even before a strike, almost like the stress and then the relief and the stress and the relief. This book is almost freaking me out a little bit. First, even before a strike, a union is thoroughly surveyed. Rockefeller Labor Institutes do psychological profiles on the union as a whole, collecting information on it through students who are set out with questionnaires, by counseling done on union members, by intensive questioning of union leaders, by attending set-up discussion sessions of union members and attending union meetings, by evaluating the union's past history, such as its tendency to strike, for example, and by going over written tests and records of personal histories of a significant number of individual members. Studies are done on racial, ethnic, and subsections of the union for every subsection, such as Italians, for example. It is recorded whether they are from middle income, lower working class, newly immigrated, perhaps without citizenship papers, deeply religious, for a long time from a certain neighborhood, or very attached to one's mother, and so forth. Then the union and subsections are evaluated for how they react during crisis situations. The pitiable psychological weakness, the neurotic guilts, the sort of horrifying images that produce fears in members, which will then be played in the media and subtly exploited in unconscious levels in the government and other Rockefeller propaganda, such as the known fear of white middle-income teachers of attack from black gang youth. Dude, Coolio, Michelle Pfeiffer. What was that movie? Yes, I have. I won't watch the latest one. My kids want to watch it with me, and I'm like, you know what? The first few were entertaining, but I don't think so. They took the mask off in this last season, and I'm like, nope, no, thank you. Something Minds, Dangerous Minds, Michelle Pfeiffer, and that Coolio song. Why are we so blind? Anyway, the methodology employed comes straight out of a behavior theory of labor negotiations written by Walton and Mackenzie for the Rockefeller-created Cornell School of Industrial Relations. First step, the union is provoked by a particularly low and insulting contract offered. The furious union comes out en masse to the picket lines, clenched fists, determined, stern faces are everywhere. Rockefeller waits out the first few days. By the afternoon of the third day, the union leader is spending most of his time in the union hall chatting with friends. By the afternoon of the fourth day, the shouts are not half as energetic, and few, if any, faces hold the stern, determined look of the first morning. Tavistock enters the scene. The strike is to be crushed in stages. The union leadership is called into negotiations. Complete psychological profiles have been done on the personality structure, etc., of the union leaders. In meetings structured like a group therapy session, unknown to the union leaders, the behavioral modifier arbiter conducts psychological probes against the union leaders. Most union leaders are schlemiels, and can easily be manipulated. The negotiators and the capitalists know that the pressure of the media attacks, the tensions of the strike, the pressure from the rank and file, and the expiring strike fund are operating on the leader, making them internally wrecked. Then the leader is brought in for further negotiations. At this point, they are close to begging for anything to take back to the membership. But instead of better conditions for the worker, the union leaders are shown the techniques to sell it to the membership so that they won't think they're being cheated. How is it done? The union leaders and the shop stewards are given a course on negotiations at the nearby Labor Institute. Here, behavioral modification is performed. Guess who runs the seminars? You guessed it, loyal Rockefeller psychologists and their staff members. However, the union penetration and eventual takeover doesn't end there. Key agents, behavior modifiers, and are placed into union positions, usually in posts of educational, secretary, or attorney. By the next contract negotiation session, the union leaders are more easily malleable and will often agree to contracts in pre-contract negotiation therapy sessions. Furthermore, attention is simultaneously turned to the membership. Psychological warfare techniques such as cooling off periods between negotiations and smear campaign and the media offers of conciliation are used and are objective forces Rockefeller has at his disposal to break the remaining will of the strikers, to crush them. Wartime development of brainwashing. In practical terms, Rockefeller and Tavistock technocrats used their knowledge to break and then to control a powerful coal miners' union, who, according to their own propaganda, occupied a position of unquestioned leadership in the history of American labor. The project director was a Rockefeller man, Eric Trist. That rings a bell. Trist had written Social Structure and Psychological Stress in Stress and Psychiatric Disorder. a piece of trash to be used in strikes and riots. With the post-war economy on a downslide and tensions among the trade unions running high, an alternative was devised. Trist suggested that workers be appointed to the board of directors of major companies. What was thought at the time to have been a major victory of labor turned out to be a brilliantly schemed plan of the Tavistock Institute. The profitability of the company, whether it stays afloat and the worker has a job, rests on outside world economic developments and internal affairs. The outside matters, such as global markets, are directed generally by commodity cartels, control of money, raw materials, and so on. The inside affairs, unless there is an investment in technological improvements, rests almost exclusively on the brutal speed up workers still believe themselves to be at the expense of fatal accidents and death. The operation to take place, no. The operation to place workers on the board of directors meant tying workers to murderous speed-ups to ensure profitability. This came about by inducing workers to internalize this need, creating a whip in their minds and disarming other workers by pressure from their mates. In a depression, such schemes consummate in frantic, anxiety-ridden compulsion among workers. Wartime development of brainwashing. This next one, that's what I just read. This next one, Marshall Plan. The Rockefeller plans for post-war Europe were already being shaped during the Second World War. In 1946, Tavistock would become an important ally in the Rockefeller fight to take over labor unions around the world. One of the key events that shaped that fight was the Marshall Plan. Named for the speech on June 5, 1947, by former General and then U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall, who proposed a solution to the disintegrating economic and social conditions that faced Europeans in the aftermath of World War II. Under the program, the United States would provide aid to prevent starvation in major war areas, repair the devastation of those areas as quickly as possible, and invite European countries to join in a cooperative plan for economic reconstruction. Was it less generally acknowledged that the plan came with strings attached? America made explicit requirements for trade liberalization, an increase in productivity, thus ensuring the Americanization of Europe as European political and economic elites became wedded to their American counterparts, with no significant economic or political development taking place without U.S. approval. Between the years 1948, what happened that year also, I meant, Israel became a state. Is that right to say they became a state? The state of Israel. Between the years 1948 and 51, when the Marshall Plan was formally in operation, Congress appropriated $13.3 billion in aid to 16 Western European states. This credit was used to buy up European industry and the European working class extremely cheaply. As Mike Peters writes in Bilderberg Group and the Project of European Unification, this unprecedented exercise of international generosity, dubbed by Churchill the most sordid act in history, served to direct economic purposes for the internationally oriented U.S. corporations which promoted it. Kai Bird described the hidden aspects of the plan in his book, The Color of Truth, on the Bundy brothers. In 1949, McGeorge Bundy, former Ford Foundation president, took on a project with the Council on Foreign Relations to study Marshall Plan aid to Europe. The Council's study group included some of the foreign policy establishment's leading figures. Working with young Bundy were Allen Dulles, future CIA director, Dwight Eisenhower, former U.S. President, George Kennan, a key ideologue of the Cold War, Richard M. Bissell, and Franklin A. Lindsay. Dulles, Bissell, and Lindsay would shortly become high-ranking officials of the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, Their meetings were considered so sensitive that the usual off-the-record transcript was not distributed to council members. There was good reason for the secrecy. Participants were privy to the highly classified fact that there was a covert side to the Marshall Plan. Specifically, the CIA was tapping into the $200 million a year in local currency counterparts funds contributed by the recipients of the Marshall Plan aid. These unvouchered monies were being used by the CIA to finance anti-communist electoral activities in France and Italy, and to support sympathetic journalists, labor union leaders, and politicians. On the one hand, the origins of the Marshall Plan are, in fact, to be found in the policy information networks around the Rockefeller circles in 1942. Key Rockefeller figures included Paul Hoffman, president of Studebaker Company. Hoffman was the leading economist for Committee of Economic Development, or CED, one of the Rockefeller-controlled organizations. The CED devised some of the essential work for the Marshall Plan to loot Europe. Before this outright takeover began in 1947, a torturous psychological softening was conducted against the European working class, including near starvation. In Germany, daily per capita consumption of calories fell to 1,300. Furthermore, in the American military government that was occupying the U.S. zone cut off the supply of home heating fuel by diverting coal away from Germany. A systematic terror campaign began. With Rician-trained death squads roaming Germany and murdering people, part of the same operation was the selection procedure conducted by Rician psychologists to weed out the most loyal and true to the Tavistock Creed as the future rulers of Europe. Workers rendered desperate, capitalists starved for credits, rulers already chosen. The Marshall Plan machine for reconstruction, that is outright looting, began in 1948. To guarantee that no trouble would come from the labor movement, the intelligence services, the CIA, the State Department, along with the Tavistock Institute, gathered key unionists to carry out the Rockefeller plan of reshaping and taking control over section of European labor movement. These key unionists were heavily recruited from the National Labor Relations Board, a Rockefeller corporatist brainchild run by his loyal lapdog, Arthur Goldberg. Goldberg was working with the Social Democrats within the European labor movement. He was funneling OSS, a CIA precursor, funds into the Social Democratic wing of the clandestine French Federation of Labor, preparing arrangements that would help U.S. intelligence take over the French movement after the war. Why am I saying movement? Did that twice in a row. On the other hand, the movement to form a united Europe was part of a larger plan to form a world government. The Hague, H-A-G-U-E, the Hague Congress, held in May 1948, called for a united Europe and issued 7 resolutions on aspects of political union. Number 7 stated, the creation of the united Europe must be regarded as an essential step towards the creation of a united world. The Marshall Plan, aside from helping put Europe back on its feet, led to the Schuman Plan in 1950, when the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman proposed that the entire coal and steel production of both France and Germany be placed under the authority of one supranational body, which in turn led to European Coal and Steel Community, then to Euratom, the European Atomic Energy Community, and ultimately to the Common Market. ECSC was the first concrete step towards political unification, the first block of human. Nowhere does it even look like human. The first block of empire building, the empire being the One World Company Limited, with the signing of the Treaty of Rome, paving the way for the European Economic Community in 1957. The next step towards a future World Company Limited was taken. And then he closes out the chapter by stating, what I have described in this chapter, as horrendous and unbelievable as it may seem, is no myth. It is a hideous reality of everyday encroachment of fascism with a democratic face upon our society, devised at Tavistock Institute, with financial help from the Rockefeller family going back over 100 years to the beginning of the 20th century. This reality, which if faced as reality and not a figment of one's overzealous imagination, can be wiped off the face of the earth. However, if that reality is not dealt with up front, then within a relatively short period of time, everything else we do as people, every hope we have for a better world, will come crashing down into a dustbin we call history. It is the Tavistock Institute or us, the people. There are no alternatives. Come back tomorrow for chapter 2. Thanks for being here, guys. Let me look at these comments. Yes, thanks, Miss Lobster, for that encouragement. Bye-bye. Yes, some places one. Are you Lisa? All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. More from the protocols, more from the Tavistock Institute. This is important stuff we need to know. Thanks for being here with me. Bye.